Hi everyone. I'm putting together one last video before we finish this unit. Out of requests from some students asked me in class this morning. It's December 5th when I'm recording this. Also, because of some of the results, um, is from the Google form of what standards you guys wanted more help with. Now, this is mostly from feedback from my B-Day classes. I realize my A-Day classes have been doing something a bit different with the Google form and the annotations we've been doing. So you've covered a lot of this stuff by the classwork we've done the past week and a half now. So both my A days and B days are sort of wrapping up the unit differently, but this hopefully will help both of you before we have like a final assessment for this unit. So one thing I want to point out is based on some of the feedback I've gotten, um, make sure you're checking the other videos, the older videos, um, before you get too frustrated. Some of this stuff I'm going over now, I realize that this is in the work before. Maybe just the wording of the standard intimidated you or confused you, and you don't realize that, hey, I already sort of know this already. Um, I'm thinking that's the case for most of it. So actually on this channel, on the YouTube channel, I put together a playlist for Unit 2. I'll add this one to it. And I even included some videos that I didn't give you guys that I used for previous years. And I put that on there as well, just if you guys want some extra support. A lot of it's repetitive from the stuff we did, but I just wanted you to see everything that I had out there. The one thing that you guys asked for that I agreed that we didn't cover as much as I would have liked to was Standard 4, which addressed mercantilism. So I know some of the videos talks about it a little bit, uh, but I wanted just to review it real quick. And you do need to understand what mercantilism is next year for the beginning of US 1. So it's a concept that you do want to understand. And there's a lot of components for mercantilism, but for our case, think of it as an economic system. Now, it also was a bit of a political system and a cultural system, but think of it as like an economic slash political system where all these countries were trying to be super powerful, right? Portugal, Spain, and then others. And how do they do this? Well, they wanted a favorable balance of trade where the value of their exports was greater than their imports. So exports is things you're sending out, like exit. Imports, things you're purchasing or bringing in. So as you have all these colonies across the globe, and especially now in South America, you're getting more raw materials and things to send out into markets. But also, they sort of saw that there was a limited amount of stuff in the world, and the more that they had and the more wealth they had, the more powerful they would be. And that's why they wanted to possess as much gold and silver as possible. And we see that as one of the motives for exploration, right? The This idea does not exist as a system today, right? But this helped eventually even fuel the Industrial Revolution. But no, it was a core concept during this age of exploration to make really states as powerful. And they just wanted to accumulate as much wealth and sort of control as much of the population as possible in order to do that. Okay, I can point to some. I can actually maybe show you guys a link to the video I did on this for my sophomores. Maybe it will help you better. So if you remind me, I'll share that with you guys. All right. There's a lot of questions on Standard 3, and I really think it was just the wording because that's really just the triangle trade. And I'm pretty sure you guys understand the triangle trade. You know the part about the Middle Passage from when slaves were taken from Africa to the Americas. You know how the raw materials and the cash crops in the Americas were then um, used. Some of the things were put together in factories, in the industrial centers of Great Britain, for example, and then brought to Africa, guns, different goods that they traded for the slaves. Keep in mind, one factor a lot of people do confuse is the difference between the Triangle Trade and the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange came first. The Columbian Exchange was not an official trade. They didn't say, hey, we'll take your pumpkins and we'll give you cows, right? It was just that goods, animals, plants, even diseases were now coming to other parts of the world for the first time and spread. Now, the triangle trade wouldn't have happened without the Columbian Exchange, right? But do realize that they are two separate concepts. All right, standard 7, a lot of people asked about. And I really think you know a lot of this is already as well. Analyze various motivations for the Atlantic slave trade and the impact it had on Europeans, Africans, and the Americans. So, what demanded? Why did the slave trade happen? Well, now Europeans are in the Americas, and they had a demand for new labor in these colonies, especially when native labor didn't last very long. Remember, they ended the encomienda system. Also, many indigenous people were wiped out by disease or conflict and all sorts of issues, why it was more preferable for them to have slaves from Africa. And this map shows you sort of where slaves are taken from and brought to. Notice you'll see here that most of the slaves actually went to South America, more so than the colonies, and even less so than the American colonies, but still very large numbers. And Portugal was the country that actually brought over the most. We always tend to think Britain, right? But of course, Britain did participate heavily in the slave trade. It's not that they didn't. Right. So those are the motivations. How did it impact? So how did the slave trade impact Europeans? Okay. I think we got this. I think we know how they did benefit from slave labor. How did it impact the Africans? Now, it impacted the Africans in Africa differently than the Africans who were taken as slaves. But I think we all know all the negative effects that the slaves were faced with. And the Americans, think of the indigenous people, right? So how did the slave trade affect them as well? Okay, so these aren't like facts you have to memorize. If you just think about it, a lot of it is common sense. And standard 8, I think you guys know this as well. It's assess the impact of economic, political, and social policies and practices regarding slaves, indigenous people, and Europeans in the Spanish and Portuguese colonies. So this is really similar to Standard 7, but it actually asks you to break it down as far as economics, political, and social things. So how did it change money and resources? How did it change political and power structures? And how did it change social things, the culture, things like that? Now, for honors classes, this is exactly what Rosselli Gardens is all about. I think we got that. Go reread the Rosselli Gardens stuff. If you're not sure, think about our discussion. For the non-honors classes, I think as long as you basically understand how it affected people's lives, you can then break it down into economics, political, and social. And if you want help breaking it down, there's going to be no test question that says, was this affect economic, political, or social? Because you know what? Almost always something is more than one, if not all three. Very often, events in history are both economic, political, and social all at the same time. It's just us trying to put things in categories. But we can explain how one event is economic and political and social. So just think, does it relate to money or resources, power, laws, government? Does it relate to culture, how people interact with one another? And then you'll know the difference. Right, any more questions, shoot me an email, come see me in class. I really think you guys are fine with this. It's just maybe some of the wordings that was throwing you off. But I'm confident that we're going to do well. And if you're not confident, come talk to me. And I hope you've been enjoying some Chopin here in the background. All right, and I'll see you guys next class.